My daughter-in-law, Chloe, read the last entry in my diary, and her face turned the color of ash. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a small, strangled sound escaped her lips. Because the entry wasn't about my day, it was a perfect, detailed description of her own recurring nightmare, the one she only ever whispered about in her sleep. Hi, everyone. I'm Grandma Agnes. My name is Agnes Miller. I'm 80 years old, and I'm speaking to you today from my favorite armchair, in the living room of the house my husband built for me 60 years ago in a small town in Minnesota. It's my house again. Completely. This is a story about a war that was fought not with lawyers or shouting matches, but with whispers, with secrets, and with fear. It's a story so dark and strange that I've never told a soul, not even my other children. They know their brother, Mark, and his wife lived with me. They know I was unwell for a time, but they don't know the truth. They don't know that I, the woman who raised their brother, was forced to live in a cold concrete garage, like a piece of forgotten luggage. They don't know that my daughter-in-law, a child psychologist of all things, systematically tried to dismantle my mind. And they certainly don't know how I fought back. They don't know that I took her deepest, darkest fears and reflected them back at her until she could no longer stand to be in the same house as the quiet old woman who knew the secrets of her soul. Before I begin, I must ask for your support. This story is a difficult one to tell. Please, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Knowing that you are out there, listening without judgment, gives me the strength to unlock this dark room in my memory and let the story out into the light. My life wasn't always a psychological battlefield. For 55 years, it was the simplest, most solid thing you could imagine. It was built on the foundation of a good man's love. My husband, Frank D. Our story began in 1960. Frank was a builder. Not a fancy architect, just a man who knew his way around a hammer and a set of blueprints. He was a quiet, steady man, with kind eyes and hands as rough as bark. He believed in things that were built to last, strong foundations, honest work, and a promise kept. This house, the one I'm sitting in now, was his wedding gift to me. He built it himself from the ground up. I remember him standing in the empty frame of the house, the wind blowing through it, and saying, "Aggie, this is it. This is our forever. A place where you'll always be safe." He was a man of his word. Our life was a quiet, happy one. It was filled with the smell of sawdust from his workshop, the taste of the tomatoes from my garden, and comfortable rhythm of two people who knew each other's hearts without needing to speak. We weren't rich in money, but we were millionaires in contentment. In 1968, our quiet life was blessed with the arrival of our son, Mark. He was the light of our world. But he was not like his father. Where Frank was solid oak, Mark was a gentler wood. A willow, perhaps. He was kind, sensitive, and creative. He hated conflict more than anything in the world. He would do anything to keep the peace, to make everyone happy. I thought this was a sign of his deep compassion. I never realized that a pathological need to please everyone makes a man a servant to everyone and a protector of no one. When Frank passed away from a heart attack 6 years ago, the foundation of my world cracked. The steady, quiet presence that had been my anchor for over half a century was gone. I was 74 years old and adrift in a sea of grief. Mark was my lifeline. He was in his late 30s, working as a high school art teacher, and he was so good to me. He'd drive the hour from the city every weekend, fix the things around the house that were starting to break, and just sit with me, letting me talk about his father. It was during this time of profound vulnerability that I made a decision that would later become the very tool of my imprisonment. Following the advice of our old family lawyer, I added Mark's name to the deed of the house, a joint tenancy. It was meant to simplify things upon my death. It was an act of love and trust, a symbol that this house, Frank's legacy, would pass to his son. It never crossed my mind that in doing so, I was giving away half the keys to my own fortress. A year after Frank's passing, Mark met Vanessa. The first time he brought her home, I was so incredibly relieved. She was, in a word, impressive. She was a child psychologist with a sharp, intelligent mind, a confident way of speaking, and a smile that was both warm and dazzling. She seemed to be everything my gentle, slightly directionless son needed. She was an expert at making me feel comfortable. She listened intently when I spoke of Frank. She admired my garden. She called me Agnes, which felt modern and respectful. "You've created such a warm, loving home here, Agnes," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "It's a real testament to the life you and Frank built. I can see why Mark is such a kind, grounded man." She saw me. She understood me. Or so I thought. I, a simple woman who had lived a simple life, was completely disarmed by her sophisticated charm. I didn't notice the way her eyes lingered a little too long on the solid, well-made furniture. I didn't detect the subtle, appraising quality in her gaze as she looked around my home. I saw a woman who loved my son, and in my loneliness, that was all I wanted to see. They married the following year. I was happy for them, but a small seed of unease was planted. Vanessa's world was very different from ours. It was a world of professional ambition, of networking, of constant self-improvement. She would gently criticize Mark's lack of ambition, encouraging him to leave teaching for something more lucrative. The quiet contentment that had been the hallmark of my life was, in her eyes, a sign of stagnation. The beginning of my exile began, as these stories often do, with a crisis disguised as an opportunity. It was about 3 years ago. Vanessa announced she was leaving her position at a community clinic to start her own private therapy practice from home. It was a bold, exciting move, but it came with a problem. "We just can't afford our apartment in the city and the overhead of a new business," she explained to me one Sunday, her voice a perfect blend of excitement and concern. And Mark and I were talking, and we had a thought. Mark, my son, picked up the thread, his voice earnest and pleading. "Mom, what if we moved in with you, just for a year or two? We could pay you rent, of course. It would allow Vanessa to build her practice without the financial pressure. And," he added, looking at me with those eyes I could never refuse, "we could be here with you. We worry about you, all alone in this big house." It was a perfect argument, wrapped in a bow of love and concern. They would get a cheap place to live while starting a business, and I would get the company and protection of my family. It seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. My heart ached at the thought of the disruption, but the fear of being a difficult mother, of standing in the way of their dreams, was stronger. I agreed. The first few months were a whirlwind. They moved in, and the quiet house was suddenly full of energy. Vanessa was a dynamo. She designated the spare bedroom as her new home office and began ordering sleek, modern furniture for it. My role, it was quickly and implicitly established, was to be the household support. Since I was retired and had the time, I took over the cooking and most of the cleaning to allow Vanessa to focus on her new practice and Mark to focus on his teaching. I told myself this was what family did. We supported each other. The first sign that my role was something less than family came when Vanessa started seeing her first clients in the house. "Agnes," she said one morning, her tone brisk and professional. "I have a client coming at 10 a.m. I'll need the house to be perfectly quiet. Perhaps you could run your errands during that time." It was a reasonable request, but the way she said it, it wasn't a request. It was an order from a boss to her subordinate. I was being told when I could and could not be in my own living room. I complied. I started arranging my life around her client's schedule. The next erosion of my status was the redecorating. Vanessa, with her psychologist's eye for calm and therapeutic environments, declared my comfortable, lived-in decor cluttered and stressful. My handmade quilts were visually noisy. My collection of family photos was a source of distraction. Slowly, methodically, she began to replace my life with her aesthetic. My warm, floral-patterned sofa was replaced by a sterile, leather sectional. The paintings my son had done in high school were taken down from the walls. The house was becoming a reflection of her mind, clean, controlled, and devoid of any messy, sentimental history. It was becoming her office, and I was just a part of the old, outdated decor that she hadn't yet managed to replace. I felt like I was fading, becoming a pale watercolor in my own home. My son, Mark, was no help. He was completely under her spell. "She has a vision, Mom," he would say when I quietly protested. "She knows what she's doing. The house looks amazing." He saw the surface, the clean lines, and the modern furniture. He didn't see the erasure happening underneath. He didn't see that his own mother was being decluttered along with the old quilts. The final demotion, the act that set the stage for my exile, came when Vanessa decided she needed a larger office. Her practice was growing, she said. The spare bedroom was no longer adequate. She needed a space with its own entrance, a place where clients could come and go without disturbing the main house. She sat me down at the kitchen table, a blueprint she had drawn up spread out before her. "Agnes," she said, her voice full of that bright, professional enthusiasm that always preceded a new violation. "I've found the perfect solution to my space issue. We're going to convert the garage." "The garage?" I asked, confused. "But that's where I keep my car." "And Frank's old tools?" "Exactly," she said, as if I had made her point for her. "It's full of junk. We'll clear it all out, put in some drywall and flooring, and it will be a perfect, self-contained office. It even has its own door to the outside." It seemed like a lot of work, a lot of expense, but it was her plan. I didn't see how it involved me, until she delivered the final, devastating sentence. "And, since we'll no longer need the spare bedroom as an office," she continued, her smile never faltering, "it's the perfect solution for you. We can move your things in there. It's a bit smaller than your current room, of course, but it's cozy, and it will free up your larger bedroom to become a proper playroom for when we have children." They weren't even pregnant yet, but she was already planning to take my bedroom, the room I had shared with my husband for 55 years, and turn it into a playroom for a hypothetical child. My heart seized in my chest. "No," I said. "Fiona, Vanessa, you can't have my room." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of cool, clinical assessment. "Agnes," she said, her voice losing its warmth, "let's be practical. Your room is the largest bedroom in the house, apart from ours. It makes no sense for one person to occupy such a large space. Moving you to the spare room is the most logical, space-efficient solution for this family. For this house." I looked at Mark, my last hope. "Mark, please." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the blueprint, at the neat, clean lines of his wife's ambition. "It makes sense, Mom," he mumbled. It's only logical." That's when I realized my son was not just a peacemaker. He was a collaborator. His love for me was conditional, and the condition was that I never, ever stand in the way of his wife's desires. But this was a line I could not let them cross. "No," I said again, my voice stronger this time. "The garage is your project, but my bedroom is mine. It is not available." The look Vanessa gave me was one I will never forget. It was not anger. It was the cool, detached look of a scientist observing a problem that needed to be solved. "All right, Agnes," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "We'll table this for now." I thought I had won. I thought I had held my ground. I had no idea that she was not retreating. She was simply changing her strategy. If I would not give up my room willingly, she would create a situation where I would be forced to. The war for my home was about to enter a new, far more brutal phase, and it would end with me in the cold, dark garage, surrounded by the ghosts of my husband's life. My small victory in keeping my bedroom was short-lived. I had won a single battle, but Vanessa was a master strategist. She didn't argue with me again. She didn't try to persuade me. She simply began a quiet, systematic, and terrifying campaign to make my own bedroom, my last sanctuary, uninhabitable. She, a child psychologist who knew the delicate mechanics of the human mind, began to use her professional skills not to heal, but to break me. It started with noise. My bedroom was next to their master bedroom, and suddenly their room became a hive of late-night activity. The television would be on, loud, until 2 in the morning. They would have long, loud conversations on speakerphone. They would start using a blender to make smoothies at 6 a.m. My sleep, once my only escape, was shattered. When I gently complained, my son Mark looked at me with genuine confusion. "What do you mean, Mom? We're just living our lives. We can't be expected to tiptoe around our own house." Vanessa's response was more clinical. "Actually, Agnes," she said, her voice full of feigned concern, "disrupted sleep and increased sensitivity to noise can be early indicators of age-related cognitive issues. Are you feeling anxious?" She was using my legitimate complaint as a data point in her ongoing diagnosis of my decline. Next, she targeted my sense of smell. A new, pungent potpourri bowl appeared in the hallway outside my room. It was a cloying, chemical scent of fake cinnamon and apple that gave me a constant, dull headache. Then came the scented candles, lit all over the house, their artificial fragrances clashing in a nauseating perfume that seemed to seep under my door. "It's called aromatherapy, Agnes," she explained with a bright smile when I mentioned the smell was making me feel ill. "It's for creating a calming, therapeutic environment. Perhaps your sense of smell is becoming overly sensitive. That can also be related to certain neurological changes." Everything I felt, every discomfort she inflicted, was turned back on me, pathologized, and labeled as a symptom of my own failing mind. I was living in a gaslit hell, and the person holding the match was a licensed professional. The campaign escalated. She began to subtly undermine my relationship with my own body, with my own senses. She would helpfully lower the thermostat until my room was freezing cold, then feign surprise when I complained. "Really? I'm perfectly comfortable. Maybe your circulation isn't what it used to be, Agnes." She would add extra salt to the food she cooked for me. When I would say it was too salty to eat, she would taste it herself and declare, "It tastes fine to me." A diminished sense of taste is very common in the elderly. She did this in front of Mark, who would taste the food, frown slightly, but say nothing, unwilling to contradict his wife's expert opinion. He chose to believe her diagnosis over the evidence of his own taste buds. I was being systematically alienated from my own sensory experience of the world. I began to feel like I was going crazy. Was the room cold, or was I just old? Was the food salty, or was my tongue failing? She had created a world where I could no longer trust my own perceptions. The ground beneath my feet was constantly shifting, and I was losing my balance. The final assault was on my sense of safety and privacy. This was the most terrifying phase. My things began to be moved. Not hidden, like a game, but subtly repositioned. A photograph of my late husband on my bedside table would be turned to face the wall. My book would be left open to a different page. The clothes in my closet would be rearranged. These were small, intimate violations. They were designed to create a constant, low-grade feeling of being watched, of being invaded. They were calculated to make me feel like I was losing control of my own small space. When I mentioned it to Mark, my voice trembling, "Someone has been in my room, moving my things," he looked at me with that now familiar expression of deep pity and concern. He took me aside later that day. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle, "Vanessa is worried about you. She says you've been exhibiting some paranoid ideation. This business about things being moved. Mom, no one is going into your room. Vanessa thinks you might be doing it yourself and then forgetting." That was her masterpiece, the perfect, untraceable crime. She had so thoroughly established the narrative of my cognitive decline that she could now commit these small acts of psychological torture and attribute them to my own failing mind. My son, my own son, believed I was the one haunting myself. I felt a despair so profound, it was like a physical weight in my chest. I was completely and utterly alone. There was no one to turn to. No one would believe me. The caring, professional daughter-in-law against the confused, paranoid, old woman. It was no contest. I broke. That's what she wanted, and she got it. I stopped complaining. I stopped protesting. I just retreated into myself. I became quiet, withdrawn. I spent most of my days in my room, with the door closed, just to escape the constant sensory and psychological assault. And my withdrawal, of course, was seen as further proof of my decline. After 2 months of this relentless campaign, she made her final move. She and Mark sat me down in the living room. Vanessa held a sheaf of papers. She had been taking notes. "Agnes," she began, her voice a perfect blend of professional concern and loving sympathy. "Mark and I are deeply worried. Your sleep is poor. You're reporting sensory issues. You're exhibiting paranoid thinking and are withdrawing from family life. These are all significant red flags." "I am not a case study, Vanessa," I whispered. "I know this is hard to hear," she continued, ignoring me. "But we cannot, in good conscience, ignore your symptoms. This house, with all its stairs and its upkeep, is no longer a safe environment for you. We've made a decision for your own good." Mark spoke then, his voice thick with a sorrow that I knew was genuine, but utterly misguided. "Mom, we've decided to move you, just temporarily, to a safer space, a place where you won't be so overwhelmed, a place where you can have your own quiet, simple environment." I knew what was coming. A nursing home. The final exile. But it was worse than that. So much worse. "We've converted the garage," Vanessa said, her voice bright with the promise of this wonderful solution. "We've cleaned it out. We've put a rug down. We've run an extension cord for a lamp and a small heater. We've moved your bed and your dresser in there. It's your own private little apartment. No stairs. No confusing hallways. Your own entrance. You'll be so much more comfortable there. So much safer." The garage. They were not sending me to a home. They were putting me in the garage. The cold, concrete, uninsulated garage where Frank had kept his tools, and I had parked my car. They were putting me there like an old, broken-down lawnmower, like a stray dog they were willing to shelter from the rain, but not allow into the house. I stared at them, speechless. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it was beyond. "It's for your own good, Mom," Mark pleaded. "It's the only way we can be sure you're safe." Safe. They were putting an 80-year-old woman into a garage with a space heater for the Minnesota winter, and they were calling it safe. I had no fight left. I was exhausted, physically ill, and psychologically shattered. I was so beaten down that a part of me, a small, terrified part, actually wondered if they were right, if I was so far gone that this was what I deserved. That weekend they moved me. They physically took my arm and led me out of my bedroom, out of the house Frank had built for me, and into the garage. My bed dresser looked small and pathetic against the bare concrete walls. An unshielded light bulb hung from the ceiling. The air smelled of gasoline and dust. They closed the door to the main house, and I heard the lock click. My life in the garage was a nightmare of cold and isolation. I was completely cut off from the life of the house. My meals were brought to me on a tray, left just inside the door. I had to use a small portable camping toilet they had set up in a corner. I was a prisoner, and the garage was my cell. My son would sometimes visit, his face a mask of guilt. He would stand in the doorway, unable to come all the way in. "Are you doing okay, Mom?" he would ask. He refused to see the horror of the situation. He had to believe this was a necessary therapeutic act, because the alternative, that he was a monster, was too much for him to bear. But it was in that cold, lonely darkness that the change began. Stripped of everything, pushed to the absolute limit of my endurance, the part of me that was a wife and a mother and a gentle soul finally died. And something else, something much older and harder, was born in its place. I had one thing left they had not taken, my mind. They thought they had broken it, but they had only succeeded in stripping it bare. And in that bareness, I found a new kind of clarity. A cold, terrible clarity. I also had my diary. A small, leather-bound book I had kept for 60 years. It was my one remaining, personal possession. They had let me keep it, probably thinking it was just the harmless ramblings of a senile old woman. They had no idea it was about to become my only weapon. I had always been a keen observer of people. It was a quiet hobby of mine. And I had been observing Vanessa for 3 years. I had listened to her talk in her sleep, I had overheard her hushed, fearful phone calls with her sister. I knew things about her. I knew her secrets. I knew her deepest, darkest, most irrational fears. The things a child psychologist, so adept at analyzing others, could never admit about herself. I knew she had a crippling secret phobia of birds, stemming from a childhood incident. I knew she had a recurring nightmare about being trapped in a dark, enclosed space, a coffin. I knew that she was terrified of the number 13, an illogical superstition that she hid from her professional colleagues. Sitting in that cold garage, a new, terrifying plan began to form in my mind. She had used psychology to destroy me. I would use psychology to destroy her. I was going to turn my diary, not into a record of my suffering, but into a mirror. A mirror that would reflect her own hidden terrors back at her, with such perfect, unexplainable accuracy that she would be forced to confront the one thing she feared most, that she, the psychologist, was the one who was truly going insane. The diary was my weapon. My mind was the ammunition. The haunting of Vanessa was about to begin. The scream that echoed through my house that night was not one of anger or surprise. It was a sound of pure, soul-shattering terror. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, had finally done it. She had pushed past the boundaries of decency and had begun to search my bedroom, my last private space, for the deed to my house. And under my bed, in a dusty old hat box, she had found what she was looking for. And something else. A small, beautifully carved, miniature wooden coffin, just big enough for a doll. And on its lid, exquisitely engraved in a flowing script, was her name, Chloe Elizabeth Gable. My garage cell had one window, a small grimy pane of glass that looked out onto the back garden. Through it, I could see the kitchen light. It became my observation post. I watched them. I studied their routines, their habits, their moments of carelessness. Vanessa, in her arrogance, believed I was a solved problem, a piece of inventory stored away. She had no idea the inventory was studying her back. My counteroffensive was a campaign of quiet terror, waged on the pages of my diary. And the first step was to ensure my weapon would be found. I knew that Vanessa, for all her professionalism, was deeply insecure and insatiably curious. She saw herself as an expert on the human mind, and the case of my supposed decline fascinated her. I knew that if I gave her the opportunity, she would not be able to resist reading my senile ramblings. She would want to see the evidence of her success. So I began to leave my diary in plain sight. I had limited access to the main house, usually only for a few minutes in the early morning to use the bathroom while they slept. During these brief forays, I would accidentally leave my diary on the kitchen counter or on an end table in the living room. I would retrieve it a few minutes later, as if I had just remembered it. I did this 3 times. I was baiting the trap. On the 4th morning, I knew she had taken the bait. When I returned to the kitchen to get my diary, it was not exactly where I had left it. It was a few inches to the left, turned at a slightly different angle. A small, almost imperceptible change that shouted the truth to me. She had read it. The connection was established. The mirror was in place. Now, the haunting could begin. I started subtly. My first entries were designed to slowly erode her sense of privacy, to create the unnerving feeling that her innermost thoughts were not safe. I drew upon the small private things I had observed. One evening, I watched through the window as she and Mark had a quiet, tense argument on the back patio. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her body language, the way she crossed her arms, the angry shake of her head. That night, I wrote in my diary, October 5th. A strange sadness in the house today. A feeling of unspoken anger. Like a silent storm brewing. I see the cracks forming in the beautiful vase. It's only a matter of time before it shatters. Iwan. The next morning, I left the diary on the kitchen counter. I watched from the garage window as she came downstairs, saw the diary, and glanced around before snatching it up. She read it for a long moment, her body perfectly still. Then she slammed it shut and threw it back on the counter, her movements jerky and angry. I had struck a nerve. I had described her private marital strife, a truth she thought was hidden. My next entry targeted her professional life. I had overheard a phone call where she was complaining about a difficult child patient, a boy named Alex, who refused to speak to her. That night, I wrote, October 8th, I had a dream about a little boy who had lost his voice. He was sitting in a room with a woman, but he would not speak. He was afraid of her. He knew she did not really want to help him. He knew she only wanted to solve him, like a puzzle. I left the diary. She read it. That evening, I heard her on the phone with her sister, her voice high and strained. "It's the strangest thing," she was saying. "That old woman, she wrote something in her diary. It was about my Alex case. It was like she was in my head. It's just a coincidence, right? It has to be." She was rattled. The seeds of doubt and fear were beginning to sprout. Now it was time to water them with her deepest, most irrational terrors. I waited a week, letting her anxiety build. Then, I targeted her phobia, her secret childish fear of birds. I started by writing about the sparrows in the garden. October 15th. The birds were very loud today. So many of them. Watching. Always watching with their small, black, bead-like eyes. They know things. They wait. Then, I escalated. October 16th. I dreamt of feathers last night. Soft, gray feathers, filling up the room. I could feel them in my mouth, in my throat. I was choking on them. The sound of wings was everywhere. I saw her read that entry. Her face went pale. She physically shuddered. That evening, she insisted Mark close all the windows and draw the curtains before dusk. She flinched when a bird chirped outside. The mirror was working. She was seeing her own fear reflected in the writings of the crazy old woman in the garage. And she couldn't understand how it was possible. I let her stew in that fear for another week. And then, I prepared for the final, devastating blow. I was going to write about her nightmare. The one I had heard her whisper about in her sleep one night, her voice thick with terror. The dream of being trapped, buried, alive. This required perfect detail, perfect execution. I spent a whole day composing the entry in my mind. That night, under the single, bare bulb of my garage cell, I opened my diary. My pen scratched across the page, not with my story, but with hers. October 24th. The dream came again. It's always the same. I am in a box. It is small and dark and I can't move my arms. The lid is closed. I can smell the damp earth above me. I scream, but no one can hear me. The silence is the worst part. The silence and the weight. I can feel the weight of the dirt pressing down. I scratch at the lid until my fingers are raw and bleeding, but it's no use. I am trapped. I am buried. And no one is coming to find me. Fine. The next morning, with a hand that was perfectly steady, I placed the diary on the kitchen table, open to that final page. I retreated to the garage and watched through the window. It was my final performance. Vanessa came downstairs. She saw the open diary. She approached it with a hesitant curiosity, like an animal approaching a trap it knows is there but cannot resist. She began to read. I watched her face. I saw her eyes scan the page. I saw her brow furrow in confusion, then her eyes widen in dawning recognition. I saw the blood drain from her face, leaving it a waxy corpse-like white. I saw her hand tremble, then fly to her mouth to stifle a scream. It was not a scream of anger. It was a sound of pure, abject terror. The sound of a rational mind breaking against the rocks of an inexplicable, impossible reality. How? How could she possibly know? But soon, she stumbled back from the table, knocking over a chair. She looked around the empty kitchen, her eyes wild, searching for a ghost. She was looking for the person who had been inside her head, the person who knew the secrets of her soul. Her gaze fell on the garage door, and in that moment, she understood. The source of the haunting was not a spirit. It was the old woman in the garage, and that was so much more terrifying. The scream that followed was the sound I had been waiting for. It was the sound of her carefully constructed world shattering. It was the sound of the psychologist realizing she was the patient, and her subject was the one holding the scalpel. She ran from the kitchen. I heard her stumbling up the stairs, shrieking for my son. Mark! Mark, get down here. You have to see this. You have to read what she wrote. I remained in the garage, a silent observer. I had fired my weapon. Now I would simply watch the fallout. The house was filled with the sounds of their frantic, hysterical argument. Her voice was high and shrill, laced with a terror he couldn't comprehend. She knows, Mark! She knows my nightmare. She wrote it down, word for word. How could she know? What are you talking about? I heard him say, his voice full of confusion. It's just a coincidence, Ness. She's an old woman. She has bad dreams, too. This is not a coincidence, she screamed. Don't you get it? She's been doing this for weeks. She wrote about our fight. She wrote about my Alex case. She wrote about the birds. Now this, she's in my head. Or going crazy. That was the moment, the fulcrum upon which her mind teetered. The expert on sanity was questioning her own. Her greatest fear was not being buried alive. It was being no different from the mentally ill patients she treated and judged every day. And I had forced her to look into that mirror. Their fight lasted for hours. It was the death rattle of their shared reality. He, the simple man, could not comprehend the psychological horror she was experiencing. He tried to rationalize, to soothe, to dismiss. But he couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain how I knew. The end came that evening. The house fell silent. Then I heard the sound of a car engine starting. I looked out my small window and saw Vanessa throwing a suitcase into the back of her car. Her movements were frantic, desperate. She looked like a fugitive. Mark ran out after her. Vanessa, where are you going? We can figure this out. I can't stay here, Mark, she cried, her voice ragged. I can't stay in this house with her. She knows things. She watches me. I can't sleep. I can't think. I have to get out of here. But where will you go? I don't know. A hotel. My sister's. Anywhere but here. She got in her car and sped away, leaving him standing alone in the driveway, a bewildered expression on his face. He came to the garage door a few minutes later. He didn't knock. He just stood on the other side. Mom? He said, his voice small and broken. What did you do? I did not answer. He stayed there for a long time. Then I heard him walk away. Vanessa never came back. Their marriage, built on her strength and his weakness, could not withstand this. It could not withstand the inexplicable, the terrifying. Her power over him was based on her superior intellect, her rational mind. And I had shattered that. I had shown him, and her, that she was just as susceptible to fear and superstition as anyone else. Mark moved out a month later. He couldn't stand the silence of the house, or the ghost of what had happened. He sold his father's tools to pay for the deposit on a small apartment. He came to me, one last time, before he left. I don't understand how you knew those things, Mom, he said, standing in the doorway of the garage, finally looking at me. But I know that what we did to you, it was wrong. I was wrong. I was a coward, and I am so sorry. I looked at my son, this broken man, and I felt a flicker of the old love, the old pity. But it was distant. It was like remembering a character in a book I had read a long time ago. I know you are, Mark, I said. And that was all. He left, and the house was mine again. The silence was clean. The air was breathable. I moved my bed out of the garage and back into my bedroom that very day. I opened all the windows, letting the fresh, cold air wash away the residue of her perfume and his weakness. I never wrote in my diary again. Its purpose was served. I keep it in a box now, a dark artifact from a dark time. A reminder that the human mind is a powerful and dangerous thing, and that sometimes the only way to fight a monster is to become one, just for a little while. I learned that the cruelest prisons are not made of concrete and steel, but of doubt and fear. My daughter-in-law, the psychologist, was an expert at building them. She built one for me, but I, the simple old woman, built a better one for her, right in the center of her own mind. I learned that there is a terrifying power in being underestimated. When people decide you are nothing, they stop watching you. They stop seeing you. And in that invisibility, you can find the freedom to act, to plan, to fight back in ways they can never anticipate. And I learned that you can take everything from a person, their home, their money, their dignity. But if you leave them with their own mind, you have left them with the ultimate weapon. So, if you are out there, and someone is trying to make you doubt yourself, trying to convince you that your reality isn't real, remember my story. Do not fight them on their terms. Do not scream when they want you to scream. Do not cry when they want you to cry. Be quiet. Watch. Listen. And find the secret they are most afraid of. Because the best way to defeat a bully is not to punch back. It's to find the one thing that terrifies them and whisper its name in the dark. The quiet, orderly home I had once known descended into a madhouse. The scream had been the first crack in the dam, and now the waters of chaos were flooding every room. I remained in my bed, the frail, ill old woman, listening to the destruction of their world. Chloe's terror was not a fleeting thing. It was a complete and total psychological collapse. The discovery of the miniature coffin, so personal, so macabre, had bypassed her rational, professional mind and struck directly at the superstitious, fearful child within. She was a child psychologist who was now, herself, terrified of a boogeyman. And the boogeyman was me. She refused to sleep in my old bedroom anymore. I heard them moving their things out that very night, a frantic, clumsy process in the dark. They moved back into the guest room that had been uninhabitable due to the mold. Suddenly, the fear of mold was nothing compared to the fear of sleeping in a room where a tiny effigy of your own death had been found. She became obsessed with me, but not as a caregiver, as a threat. She couldn't look at me without her eyes widening in fear. She would flinch if I came into a room unexpectedly. The quiet old woman she had dismissed as furniture had become a source of profound, supernatural dread. She tried to explain it to my son, David. I would hear their endless, circular arguments. "It was a threat, David," she would cry, her voice ragged from weeping. "A death threat from your mother." "It was a box, Chloe," he would argue back, his voice full of a desperate, strained logic. "A weird, creepy little carved box? She's an old woman who does weird, creepy things. She's losing her mind, that's all." That had always been their narrative, their justification for everything. That I was senile. But now, that narrative was turning on them. What was more terrifying? A senile old woman who makes a strange object? Or a quiet, seemingly frail old woman who knows your deepest secrets and can craft a perfect, terrifying symbol of your own mortality and place it in your path? The first was a problem to be managed. The second was a monster to be feared. And she was beginning to believe I was the monster. My life, ironically, improved. They left me alone. They were too afraid to engage with me. They would leave my food tray outside my new bedroom door, my old bedroom, which I had reclaimed without a single word, and scurry away. The constant pressure, the condescending remarks, the invasion of my space, it all stopped. I had created a perfect 5-foot radius of pure terror around myself, and it was more effective than any restraining order. I used my newfound peace to continue my quiet work. I knew the coffin had been the primary assault, but a good general follows up a cannonade with a ground invasion. I began to subtly reinforce the haunting. I knew, from her hushed phone calls, that Chloe had a morbid fear of the number 13. A silly, childish superstition that she, the psychologist, was deeply ashamed of. So I began to use it. I would take 13 beans from the pantry and leave them in a small, neat pile on the kitchen counter for her to find. I would take 13 fallen leaves from the garden and arrange them in a pattern on the front porch. I would clip 13 roses and leave them in a vase on the dining room table. They were small, silent, and utterly deniable acts. But to her, in her heightened state of fear, they were not coincidences. They were messages. They were symbols. They were proof that the quiet old woman in the bedroom knew the secrets of her soul. Her paranoia grew. She started seeing omens everywhere. A dead bird in the yard was a sign. A crack in a mirror was a curse. She, the woman of science and reason, was becoming a prisoner of her own terrified superstitions, all orchestrated by me. David was at a complete loss. He was trying to hold on to his rational world, but his wife was descending into what looked like madness. And he was beginning to be affected by it himself. The house no longer felt like his. It felt like a hostile, alien territory. It felt like my house again. And he was terrified of its quiet, watchful owner. The final straw for them was the workshop. My husband's workshop in the garage was a sacred space I had never let them touch. It was full of his old tools, his smell, his spirit. One night, David, in a fit of desperate, angry frustration, decided to clean it out. He was going to erase the last vestige of my husband's power from the house. He went into the garage. I heard him moving things, the crash and clatter of him trying to impose his own order on my husband's sacred space. And then I heard him scream, a short, sharp cry of pure shock and terror. He came running into the house, his face as white as a sheet. "The birds!" he gasped to Chloe. "In the workshop, there are dozens of them." She didn't understand, but I did. For the past year I had been carving them. Dozens of small, perfect, lifelike wooden birds. Sparrows, wrens, finches. Each one a tiny, beautiful act of love for my husband's memory. I had them arranged on the shelves of his workshop, a silent, wooden flop. But to David, who knew of Chloe's deep, secret bird phobia, who was now living in a house he believed was haunted by a malevolent, all-knowing presence, this was not a collection of carvings. It was an army. It was a threat. It was another impossible, terrifying message from the quiet old woman who knew their every secret. That was the end. The discovery of the wooden birds, on top of the coffin, on top of the relentless psychological pressure, shattered their last reserves of courage. They left 2 days later. There was no argument, no confrontation. There was only a frantic, desperate flight. They packed their car with whatever they could fit, their movements clumsy with fear. They looked like refugees, fleeing a haunted land. Chloe could not even look at the house as they drove away. She stared straight ahead, her face a pale, blank mask. David was the one who looked back. He looked at my window, where he knew I was watching, and his face was not angry. It was a ruin, a landscape of pure, unadulterated terror and a dawning, horrified respect. He had come into my home to conquer a weak old woman, and he had been defeated by a force he could not comprehend. He had been broken by a whisper and by a block of wood. The silence that descended upon my house when they were gone was the most beautiful, most profound silence I had ever known. It was not the empty silence of grief. It was the clean, pure silence of peace, of sovereignty. My home was mine again. The air was clean. The ghosts, the real ghosts of their noise and their cruelty, were gone. My son David called me a week later. His voice was a thread. "We're not coming back," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of surrender. "Chloe, she's not well. She's staying with her sister. She can't stop talking about the box." "I see," I said. There was a long pause. "Mom," he finally whispered, "how did you know? How did you know about her dream?" I held the phone, and I thought about telling him the truth. About his wife's sleep-talking. About my own quiet, desperate observations. But I decided against it. The mystery was my power. The inexplicable nature of my knowledge was the heart of my victory. To explain it would be to reduce my terrible, sacred magic to a simple trick. "Some things," I said, my voice a quiet, gentle mystery. A mother just knows. He had no answer for that. We said a quiet, formal goodbye. It was the last time we ever spoke. Their marriage, I heard later, did not survive. How could it? It had been built on her strength and his adoration of that strength. I had shown them both that her strength was a fragile, hollow thing, easily broken by its own hidden fears, and his adoration had turned into a profound and abiding terror. I have my house back. I moved my things back into my own bedroom. I took the small cherry wood coffin, and I wrapped it in a silk cloth, and I placed it in the very back of my cedar chest. It is not a trophy. It is a reminder of the woman I was forced to become to survive, a reminder of the dark, quiet, and terrible strength that lies dormant in the heart of even the gentlest soul. I learned that when someone tries to bury you, they often don't realize that they are planting a seed. My daughter-in-law, with her cruelty and her greed, tilled the soil of my grief and planted the seed of a rage I never knew I possessed. I learned that the most effective weapons are not always the loudest. A whisper can be more devastating than a scream. A secret can be more powerful than a sword. And a perfect, intimate knowledge of your enemy's fears is the only weapon you truly need. And I learned that there is a great, terrifying power in being underestimated. They saw a quiet, foolish old woman. They never saw the artist. They never saw the observer. They never saw the wife of a master woodworker who knew how to be patient, how to be precise, and how to carve away the unnecessary until only the terrible, true thing remains. So, if you are out there and you feel that you are being buried, that your world is being taken from you, that you are being made small and silent, I urge you, be quiet, be patient, watch, and listen. Your enemies will always eventually tell you their secrets. They will whisper their fears in the dark, and that is when you will know exactly what you need to do. Thank you for listening to my dark and difficult story. Your silent presence has been a great comfort. If my story has resonated with you, I would be grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell. In the comments below, I invite you to share a story about a time when a quiet, unexpected skill became your greatest strength. Love you all. This is Grandma Eleanor, and I'll see you in the next story.